What is going on, everybody? In this video, we are going to be talking about Raspberry Pis and showing how to set up Docker on Raspberry Pis. If you're not familiar, Raspberry Pis are small little boxes. I've got two here. I have a Pi 4, which honestly I really don't care for because of the fan. Raspberry Pi 3. They use ARM architecture. They're like small PCs. They're really great, fun to play around with. And I think you can actually learn a lot by using them. SSH, networking, just a lot of stuff. If you start playing around, you'll come across some really interesting problems. So in this one, we are going to be using a Raspberry Pi 4, and we are going to be installing the operating system, getting it set up, and installing Docker. So, to begin with, you will need, well, a Raspberry Pi, but you will also need an SD to USB converter. And mine went bad about a year ago. The Raspberry Pi usually comes with a converter, but I kept trying to burn the SD card and was having all types of issues, and finally said, oh, to heck with it. Went to Best Buy, picked up this USB 3 Samsung SD to USB converter, and it actually came with a 256 gig SD card, which is pretty big, and I think it was 37 bucks. I'll put a link down in the description in case anyone's in the same boat. Maybe hard to see on the camera there, but that's all it is. So I'm going to go ahead and put the SD card in my converter and step away for just one moment because my USB ports are in the back. And that'll probably pop up. Oh, that's a little odd. I would have thought that would have opened. Oh, there it is. And those popped up on the other screen. So the easiest way to get going is to use a program called PyImager. Came out several years ago. It's just really easy for selecting an operating system, putting some configurations in place, and then having that burned to your SD card without having to mess around with other programs like Etcher and things like that. So to get started, we can just open up a web browser and look for PyImager. And let's see. I am on Linux Mint, which is built on top of Ubuntu. So this is the download I would want. Now, I already have this installed, but I just wanted to show you, if I go ahead and click on that, same version is already installed. If you are on Linux, you can do probably apt-get install rpi-imager. Usually those versions lag a little bit behind, which is fine, but I believe the one currently that my system points to is 1.7.5, and this is 1.8.5, which I just haven't had as many issues with. So however you'd like to do that, you could, if you don't have it installed, it'll pop up install. You'll probably get a flashing message if you're on Linux saying an older version of this program is in channel. So you can either ignore that or do the apt-get install, yum install, whatever kind of Linux you're on. Okay, but since I already have it installed, I can just search for Imager and bring that up. Choose device. This will be for a Raspberry Pi 4. The difference between the 3 and the 4, again, is 32-bit versus 64-bit. So make sure you choose the correct version because otherwise it won't work. So Pi 4, and actually, if you choose the default here, it comes with a desktop environment, which is fine if you just want to hook up a monitor, keyboard, mouse, and play around with it like a normal PC. I typically use mine kind of like they're a cloud computer and SSH to them. So to do that, if you scroll down a little bit here, or up, no filtering, At least I thought it was no filtering. Let's see. Oh, sorry, it's on the next step. So this will show me what I can use on the Raspberry Pi 4. Again, desktop environment is listed here. Notice it's a port of Debian Bookworm, a different Linux distro, and it's good to note that. I'll point that out later when we come to it, but just keep in mind what the image is built off of. And I'm going to go down here and just do Raspberry Pi OS Lite 64-bit. Light meaning doesn't have as much bloatware, extra programs, does not have the desktop environment because we are just going to use it for SSH. And choose storage. I see my SD to USB here, and choose that. Now, I already have some settings in here. You might have a gear icon, or you might get the same pop-up. I'm not quite sure. But you should get something that allows you to choose these settings. And here I'm going to edit settings just so we can see those. Set a host name. You can call it whatever you'd like. Pi 4 is fine. This .local is going to set what's called an MDNS record, meaning devices in your home network or wherever you're hooking the Pi up to are going to be able to reference it by this name. So when it looks around the network, it says Pi 4, and that's going to resolve to the IP address of our Raspberry Pi. If that sounds a little cryptic and you're not familiar with networking, you can definitely just kind of wave your hand at that and just know we'll be able to use that name. Not too long ago, Raspberry Pi defaulted to the username Pi, and you did not have to set up this username and password if you were just going to SSH to it, because it would use Pi. They changed that, so even if you select SSH only and don't allow password login or password authentication, it's not going to come up. I ran into that a while ago when I was playing with it, and I was like, well, why isn't my Raspberry Pi coming up? Hauled a monitor out, looked at it, and it wants some extra setup. It wants you to set up a username, password, and some other configurations. Not really sure why they did that. Well, I understand why they got rid of the default user, but I'm hoping they kind of change that in the future to make it easier. All right, that being said, next option, configure wireless LAN. That just wants to know the network that this Raspberry Pi will be connecting to, so you don't need to log in and then do that manually and set up the Wi-Fi. This way it just automatically connects to your Wi-Fi, and then you can connect to it. In my case, my SSID, Wi-Fi McWiFace. I do have my password there. Let's go and ask for the country. I'm in the United States. The local settings, I am in Chicago, and my keyboard layout is indeed US. So services, enable SSH. The way I typically will use a Raspberry Pi. You can use the password authentication, could SSH there and use the password that you set up in the previous screen. And I'm doing allow public key authentication only. And I believe it looks at the username you chose and goes into your .ssh directory and tries to find the public key associated with that name, and then it's going to put that public key on your Raspberry Pi, and the private key is of course on your local machine, so you can SSH. And I think if you did not have one already, this would be clickable, and then you just need to run SSH keygen. It would put the private key on your PC, and then the public key on the Raspberry Pi. And options, this just has to do with how it's going to make the SD card. I'm going to save. Would you like to apply the OS customization settings? Sure. and yes. And then it just asks for your local password, and let that run. Now, I've actually gone through this and have an SD card in the Raspberry Pi 4, the leaf blower. I call it so because of that real noisy fan on the back there. And we can just go ahead and plug that in and we'll start it up. And that's why I call it the leaf blower. That is the noise that my fan is making. I'm going to turn it off and on, I don't know, 8 times, and there we go. Running like a champ. Love it. Okay, I guess I could have just let that run real quick. Again, I have a USB 3 SD to USB converter, which I found runs a lot faster than the stock one that comes with the Raspberry Pi usually. Okay, now your Pi's running. It does not have a desktop. How the heck do you find it? Well, there's a few ways. If you happen to know where your DHCP server for your home network is, probably your router, what hands out the IP addresses to devices, you could log in there and you'd probably see that listed. If you have that capability and you can make a DNS reservation, you might want to assign it an IP so it's always at that IP for convenience. If you're familiar with Nmap, a network scanner you can use from the terminal, you could do an Nmap scan, locate it that way. If you have an app called Fing, I think it is available for iOS and Android. That's what I like to use. It's a free app, but it just shows me all the devices on my network. So when I fire up a Raspberry Pi or a new device that I'm troubleshooting that doesn't allow a login, it's just really easy to track down. And I know this isn't showing on the camera, but I have my phone here, and I just pulled up the Fing app, scanned my network, showed some of my smart devices, Chromecasts, cell phones that are connected, which is why I'm not showing it to the camera. But then I also see Pi 4 listed there. So now that I know its IP address, I can just Control-Alt-T to open a terminal. I'll make this a little bigger here. And SSH. It's going to be the username that we set up in Pi Imager, in my case, Gary. And looking here, my IP is 192.168.0.160. All right, I've already done this before, but it gives me a very useful command here saying, hey, it's not going to work, but you can get it to work by running this command. So I will just do as it says, and then SSH again. I will take the fingerprint, and here we are in the Raspberry Pi. All right, so let's get Docker running. There are a few things we could do. Let's see, enable, I believe UFW enable 22. Let's see, UFW. Oh, there are two things that you always want to do when you first start up a Pi. The sudo apt-get update and upgrade. Could have made that a one-liner with the double and signs, just running the two commands together, saying, hey, if the first one succeeds, run the second one, and do them both real quick like that. So this might take a moment, so let me pause it here real quick, and I will come back to do the update real quick. And what I meant to say was do the upgrade real quick, so we'll do that with a sudo apt-get upgrade. Not sure if the -y is necessary, but then I won't have to hit Y if prompted. And we'll let that run. And I think this one's a little bit longer, so let me leave off here, and once that's complete, we'll pick back up. Alright, now that that's finished, wasn't too bad. Depending on your internet connection, might take a little longer, but probably just about enough time for half a cup of coffee. Okay, so back to UFW. I should have explained that. The uncomplicated firewall. Just a good security practice to only allow certain ports to be open on your devices to stop bad actors from poking around. In my case, I want to continue to SSH to my Raspberry Pi, so I'm going to allow SSH traffic, which uses port 22. So I will do UFW allow 22, and I probably need to install it. I'm surprised it didn't tell me to install it. So let me see. Sudo apt get install UFW. And just yes to do that. Shouldn't be a very big install. And when going through this, just make sure that you do enable port 22, or you could even use the shorthand SSH before you turn on the firewall. Otherwise, you will be locked out if you don't have the password logon enabled. So let's try this again. And actually, let me see if I can just do UFW allow 22. You'd be root to run this script. That's what I thought. Just want to show the error. Well, one, because I was curious, and two, in case you run into it. All right. We could also open up other ports the same way, but for now, we'll just turn this on and sudo enable UFW. Oh, I think it is activate. I must be getting a little tired here. Let's see. Oh, I am tired. It is the program and then the keyword that it uses as a command line argument. May disrupt. That's fine. If we get kicked out, we should be able to get back in. Looks like we are good to go. We did not get kicked out. And let's see if I can do sudo UFW status. And you can see our rules are in place to allow port 22. On IPv version 4 and 6, that is that 6 entry. Okay, that was a lot. So moving on to actually installing Docker. If you start Googling around, install Docker on Raspberry Pi, you might come across binaries being just pre-made programs that you download and then run. You'll probably find 32-bit more than the 64-bit, but remember when I mentioned this is a port of Debian Bookworm, so what we can do is just go out and do install Docker Debian. And you see some stuff there, but this is the one we want. This is actually going to add it to our repositories, so when updates are available, we can get those security patches, all that good stuff that keeps us nice and safe and running smoothly. So if you're curious, what you can do is you can copy this part and stop before the pipe, and you can see what kind of entry it's going to put in there. So let's see what that looks like. And actually, let me switch back. Okay, just wanted to make sure my camera wasn't covering that. Okay, so if you're wondering, hey, it's Debian. How does it know we're not AMD 64 or some other architecture other than ARM? Well, it's actually going to be, if you look here, we have print architecture, and then down here, indeed, it does know we are on ARM 64-bit, and down here, the OS release is just going to kick out the version code name. Tripping over my own words here. So this piece is going to what's called sourcing this file, which is going to make this variable available for use. In this case, bookworm, and then it's only going to do that if this previous command succeeds. That's going down a bit of a rabbit hole, so let's jump back into the install. And actually, I'm lazy, so I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and I'm going to nano install Docker to make a file. I'm just going to right click and paste all of that in. So all of that's going to run. Control X, Y for save the buffer, and keep the name the same. Just hit enter, and you should be kicked back to the terminal. We can just make that executable with chmod +X, install Docker, and then we can just sudo install Docker. And while that's running, we can go back and see what else we might need to do. The other commands we could have added to this executable file and just made it kind of a one script and done. But let's see what else we have. Has a little warning here, saying you might need to change that, hard code your version. That's all good stuff to be aware of. And Linux post install. All right, I believe Docker already got created as a group with that install, so we actually just need to modify our user and add them to the Docker group. That's what this $user is, and you could just do user. So running this command would be the same as if you just said sudo usermod -ag docker Gary in my case. Oh, I guess we did need to create the group. Again, we could have put all of these steps into that executable. So I'm going to create that group. And then up arrow twice, add myself to that group. And we should be able to do new grp and then Docker, just to refresh that. So new grp Docker and Docker run hello world. I don't believe I need to update. That's a little bit odd. Let me go ahead and exit out. Oh, it looks like, I don't know what happened there. It's like it had 2 sessions. Let me see if I can exit out completely and then SSH back. Hopefully that firewall rule is working. Otherwise, we might get denied. That's taking a long moment. Let me try another terminal real quick here. And Gary at 192 dot, what were we, 160? No, 168.0.160. Control C that, Control C this one. I'm going to check that IP address should not have changed. I just want to make sure that that is up and running. Oh, and of course, while I'm looking to check, it lets me back in. All right, Docker run hello world. Oh, you know what? I did not install Docker. I added it. Got ahead of myself. So here we are just installing some of the prerequisites. Here we are adding the package to our sources, the repositories where the system looks at to install packages, and then updating so it's aware of it. And now we actually need to install it. Thought something was a little off because I'm fairly certain if you go ahead and run this, it will create the Docker group, and then you wouldn't have needed to do that like I did. So this one may take a little bit of time. That's why the other one was so fast. It was just adding the repository. All right. Now that we, actually have Docker installed, let's try and see if we can run an image. Looks like I have some kind of error there. So let's just do what it says, sudo apt-get update fix missing. While that's running, I'm going to scroll up, see if I see any errors. Oh, looks like I had a timeout on cannot connect. Let's try running that one more time here. So it looks like just a hiccup in the network. All right, we'll let that run. Hopefully it completes this time, and then we'll pick back up once that is completed. All right, now that one did take a little time. I guess my internet service isn't exactly killing it tonight. So let's try one more time. Just Docker run hello world. Success. So I've not run this yet, so it's going to go out there, find the image, pull it down, and then execute that and exit the container. All right, so something a little more interesting we can do, and maybe get the gears churning if you're looking to do some projects out there. Let's find something we can run a container a little more interesting. Let's try pg admin docker container. And container deployment sounds good. I've used it many times, which is why I'm kind of able to scroll through here real quick. And this is the code I want. Do not need to really pull it because when I go to run it, it's going to look at my system and say, hey, do I have this image? No. Well, I'm going to go to Docker Hub, which is the default, pull it down. And then the important thing I want to point out here is it's going to bind it to, or forward the port 80 to the local host. All right. So we just need to copy that. I don't think that's too big. Oh, that's a lot of pulls. So it might take a moment. So while that's running, I'm actually going to open up another terminal, make that nice and big so we can see it. Nothing says I can't have more than one connection. SSH. Again, the username, the IP address. Actually, I wonder, I should be able to just do Pi4, I believe, because that name is known in my network. I don't need to type that out. And I could also put a config file in my .ssh directory. That'd be kind of long to go into, but if you want to look into a config file, it can make it really convenient, especially for VS Code connecting remotely. All right, and while that's running, that's still pulling. I don't know if that's the Pi or the internet that's taking so long. But if I do sudo UFW status for our uncomplicated firewall, I can see port 22 is still open. But you know what? I also want to allow port 80. See how that pull is going. We'll give that another moment. Really should have chosen a smaller image. So I hate to leave it off here, but I don't want to leave you just hanging. We'll pick back up once that's done. Okay, now that did take a bit of time. So now it's up and running. We can double check that with Docker PS. And you know what? We allowed port 80 on the firewall, but just to be sure, let's do a sudo UFW reload to reload our settings. And now, in theory, we should be able to come out here and do something like HTTP Pi4. And if we had forwarded this to a different port, we would have, of course, needed to open up that port in the uncomplicated firewall, and we would have needed to specify that here. And actually, just to show that real quick, I'm just going to do Pi4. 80 is the default port for the HTTP protocol. So indeed, we are here. And if we switch back, we can look at the username, password, user at domain, super secret. So user at domain.com, super secret. Don't need to save that. And I don't have PG admin running anywhere at the moment, but I just wanted to show you how you could run something on the Raspberry Pi and then get to it both by its IP address, by its name. So a way maybe you could flip this around is if you wanted to run PostgreSQL database on a Raspberry Pi, you could definitely do that with an image and the default port 5432, and then just run pgadmin on your machine and connect to the database running on the Raspberry Pi. So I think that's all for this video, and that's probably a little more than enough, but hopefully that got you going, showed you how you can get Docker running on a Raspberry Pi 4, which again is 64-bit. I'm not sure if I should be sorry about all the errors, or I kind of like having those in the videos just so if you're trying to follow along and you run into them, you kind of see where they come from and how to resolve them. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those down in the comments section, and I'll see you in another video.